Good evening. Good to see you all again for our evening worship service. For those who are here back at once tonight, we're thankful for your presence. Be grabbing your Bible, please, and opening up to Matthew chapter 6. We'll be in Matthew chapter 6 this evening. Appreciate Dan leading those songs tonight. Dan, good job. I'm almost tempted to scrap my whole lesson and go to 1 John chapter 4 and talk about how God is love, but I don't know if an impromptu on-the-spot lesson is the best thing for me to do right now. So we'll stick with some things that we have prepared for Matthew chapter 6 tonight. If you're opening to Matthew chapter 6, I want you to begin with me in verse 2. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 2. Thus when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. Jesus is building on a teaching here in the Sermon on the Mount about this idea of practicing our righteousness before God as we should, or as we're expected and supposed to. He talks about that in verse 1. Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. And then give some examples about how we might do this or how we would do this, and some ways we should think about avoiding having that type of attitude of wanting to be seen, this idea of we're just putting on a show, in a sense, for other people. And as we go through this text in verse 2 and in verse 5 and in verse 16, Jesus uses a similar illustration, some similar language in all of those, but one of the particular things he uses is the word hypocrite. This idea of someone who really is putting on a show. There's some connection to that particular word, this idea relating to a stage actor, someone who puts on a performance in some way. They're pretending to be someone who they're not, which if you're a stage actor, that's just you doing your job. But if you're a disciple of Jesus, that's a very different thing that we're talking about. I think about this evening because a few months ago, Becca and I started watching the show Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I don't know if you are familiar with that show or not. It was a comedy that was on NBC and I think maybe on Fox for a little while. And an actress on that show named Stephanie Beatriz plays this really kind of hard-faced, serious person, kind of always, no emotion, very stern in her responses, no real humor or anything like that. And then later I was watching on Disney Plus the movie Encanto and hearing her voice and then seeing the Hollywood Bowl performance of that. And I saw this picture and I thought, wow, that lady looks really familiar. And here's this person who's acting as someone who is this very bubbly and singing songs and kind of happy-go-lucky in a Disney movie kind of person. And I look it up on IMDb and I'm like, wow, that's the same person. And that just sticks out in my mind to think about there are actors who, you look at them and they can go from one of, I'm kind of always serious and intense to I'm this singing, happy, bubbly person. And again, from someone who's a stage actor for their profession or for their job, that's wonderful, that's amazing. That helps us to enjoy the entertainment that we might be consuming or watching in that moment. But, once again, when it comes to being children of God, when it comes to being followers of God, putting on a show and putting on entertainment and looking for other people's attention is not the type of direction we want to be going. And wanting to put on a show and being a hypocrite is dangerous. In fact, Jesus talks about that, and we want to address that just briefly this evening. Our lesson is just very quickly to get to the point of the main idea. The thrust tonight is don't be a hypocrite. As Jesus uses this phrase, it seems like maybe very easily he is targeting the Pharisees and the scribes, even Matthew chapter 6, even as he more clearly does in places like Matthew chapter 15 and Matthew chapter 23. But just thinking about some of the ideas briefly about what is a hypocrite, how do we avoid being a hypocrite, and what should we do to make sure that we're not doing what we're not supposed to do and doing what we are supposed to do. Is that clear as mud for you all tonight? The idea that we want to be people who are avoiding this type of performance for the recognition and for the praise of other people. I hope that we can be good influences and shine as lights to point people to God, but if we're just shining as lights to put the spotlight on me, that's not the direction the spotlight needs to be pointing or needs to be showing. Let's notice this again briefly from our text. Again, Matthew chapter 6 and verse 1. Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Read with me verse 2, verse 5, and verse 16 now of Matthew chapter 6. In Matthew chapter 6 and verse 2, again, thus when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues, those who are acting, those who are looking to get attention of other people, and in the streets that they may be praised by others. Truly I say to you, they will receive their reward. In verse 5, Jesus says, and when you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, that they may be seen by others. But truly I say to you, they have received their reward. And when you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their face, that their fasting may be seen by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. This hypocrite that is acting here, a righteousness that does not align with what is really true within their life, what are some things we can point about and see throughout all of these texts? Number one is the idea of what are they looking for? What is a hypocrite looking for? What is this person and the way that they're behaving and the things that they're doing? What's the goal? In all of this, you see all of these passages end similarly, that they may be praised by others. And truly I say to you, they have received their reward. We've joked before about the holiness box, getting that installed up here, this idea of the holiest person of the week will sit in a special box up here where everyone can see them during the church service and know how good of a person they've been. There are people who want that kind of attention. And they may never actually say, I want to have the special privileges, but people in the way that they give their prayers, the people in the way that they give to the needy and charity, or then go to promote it and put it all over so people will see how great of a person they are. People who fast, something that should draw us closer to God in those moments, often connected with prayer, something that people are doing to say, look how holy I am in the way that I'm denying myself something here in this time. Those people who, probably for good reason sometimes, will say, hey, I'm about to take a 30-day break from social media. We promote on social media, I'm about to take this break from social media. Sometimes that's to let people know that if that's how you normally interact with me, know that I'm going to be dark in that. For some people, that might be a, look how much better I am than you because you're still scrolling on your phone, and now I'm taking a break in that moment. Now, all of that, though, can be somewhat difficult to tell. I mean, how do you know when someone's being a hypocrite if that's all you ever know them as? If they're that person who's always going around and having the great prayers, if they're always promoting their great giving, if they're always those who are fasting and look to be very holy people, what is it that can help us to understand if someone is really being a hypocrite? And it may be that some people are very deceptive. There are some to go back to our illustration from earlier, some very talented actors who can really involve themselves in a role, and you kind of forget who that person is. Maybe you know the actor Christian Bale. He's kind of known for getting maybe kind of, I think method is the term. He either puts on a lot of weight to kind of portray a character and get into that character, or he builds a lot of muscle, or he loses a lot of weight and gets very skinny and thin. He goes through these great extremes that from one film to the next, you might recognize it was him. Or Gary Oldman's one of these guys who's always in different type of makeup and kind of lives in his character whenever he works in film. It might be that we know people who are hypocrites who are just kind of living and pursuing that role and always have that kind of actor, that disguise, that costume on anytime we're around them. So what is it that helps us to recognize what they're looking for? It may be that we just, as we get to know them, recognize that as they're looking the spotlight, or as they're shining the spotlight is never pointing up, but always pointing inward at them. And it may be that we really struggle to tell what's going on in the lives of those people. I do think maybe something about Matthew chapter 7. In Matthew chapter 7 and verse 15, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes, or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit. The diseased tree bears bad fruit. Healthy tree cannot bear a bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown to the fire. Thus you will recognize them by their fruits. I think ultimately, every hypocrite comes to be known who they are because of the fruit that gets born in their life. And all of the people who may humbly serve God and without being in the spotlight come to know what the works that they do are and where they're pointed towards because the fruit is born in their life as well. Not as they're promoting it, but as a scene that they are doing good to honor God. So God help us to maybe notice that in the lives of others, but this really isn't so much about looking at other people, it's thinking about me. And the question for you and for me to be asking tonight is, if we're wanting to not be hypocrites, is how do we keep ourselves from doing that? Back in our text once again, we look at Matthew chapter 6 and the end of verse 2. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 5, truly I say to you, they have received their reward. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 16, truly I say to you, they have received their reward. As we honor and look to serve God through this life, am I doing it so that way people will look at me on the first day of the week? Or am I doing that so that people will look at God and look at Him through His Word on the first day of the week? Is that something that as I go through the rest of the week, am I looking for that spotlight? Am I looking for the reward of all the praise that comes to me? What should we be doing instead of that? We see from the rest of our text, Matthew chapter 6 and verse 3, when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. When talking about prayer in Matthew chapter 6 and verse 6, when you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who sees in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 17, but when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Is our emphasis upon receiving the praise and the glory and attention of others around us? Or is our heart truly set on looking to honor and glorify God, looking to be those people who do good works that point the spotlight to Him, as it says in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 16 in the previous chapter? I think this idea goes on and thinking about really what's going to help us to not be hypocrites is what's going on here, is it not? Thinking about what's going on in our heart, what really matters in our hearts. Is it about how I want the praise and attention of other people? Or is it, like what we read Jesus continue to say in Matthew chapter 6 and verse 19, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Is our heart focused on the things of God and the things of heaven, and wanting to serve and glorify Him through our prayers and our acts of charity and through our fasting and through our works? Are they things that are looking to be God-focused, or are these things that are me-focused, intentions from other people? These are introspective questions that can be very easily glanced off of, well, that's not me. I would never want to do that. I would never be like that. But hopefully those are things that we would honestly reflect and think about, is that if I want to truly glorify God, that Jesus talks about the dangers of people becoming hypocrites. And we see that in the lives of people too. It bugs me to no end, I'm sure it bugs you too, when you see something about a preacher who ends up turning that he was just in it for the money. Or a leader in a church who's involved in some sexual misconduct scandal that's been kind of swept under the rug for years. And thinking about, how could somebody do something like that? How could churches let something like that go? And the type of tainted that puts on people who try to do the work of preaching or teaching and working in a church honestly, and the type of damage that does. And that damage does not just go away because of maybe who I claim to be. That damage is hurtful, not just for one particular person, not for those who are hurt and deserve justice in that moment, but for the cause of Christ and the cause of God as well. We need to think very seriously about, where am I putting my emphasis and my priority? So, we think about the things of our heart and wanting to be people who look to honor God and to serve Him. To be people who are really and seriously reflecting about how our focus, our desires are going to serve the Lord. As we close this lesson this evening, I'm thinking about that idea again of the bearing fruit that Jesus calls us to, that we would not be like those false prophets from the previous chapter. Thinking about the serious questions, the serious thoughts of chapter 7 and verse 21. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. And on that day many will say to me, Lord, Lord, do we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name? Then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Some people are really good actors. There are really good actors in Hollywood. For whatever you want to say about Hollywood, if you can enjoy some of the work that they do, you can say that person's very talented with the gifts that they have. There are some people who are really good actors in the church, and that's a much more serious and dangerous thing. And the really serious, the really dangerous and scary thing is that sometimes we see those actors when we look in the mirror. We need to be people who are not just doing these things for Jesus really because of our own glory, but because of His glory, looking to really accomplish His will, looking to follow the example of Jesus to say, nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. What's the big deal? What's the damage? You can go back to Matthew chapter 6 and verse C, and Matthew chapter 6 and verse 2 and see. I will say to you that they have received their reward. The reward of being a hypocrite may be the praise of others in this life, but it also means eternal separation from God. And that's what we want to avoid. That's what we want to steer clear from, to recognize that it's not worth it. All the pomp and circumstance that this life has to give is not worth anything to the eternal consequence of being separated from the Lord for all eternity. As we are moving to our invitation at this time, one final passage in Matthew chapter 16. Matthew chapter 16, Jesus, after he is identified by Peter as being the Christ, and after speaking to his apostles about the work he's going to do and going to Jerusalem and dying and being resurrected on the third day, Jesus gives the call about what it means to be a disciple. If we want to know what it means to follow Jesus, it isn't just coming up with an idea for ourselves of what it means that's going to get us the most attention. This is what Jesus says being a disciple is like. It means not letting you be the center of the picture, but leaving yourself behind, even crucifying yourself. Matthew chapter 16 and verse 24, Jesus told his disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Whoever would save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. What profit is a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul? This song we're about to sing reminds us of the severity of the type of discussion we're talking about tonight. This is not just looking for 15 minutes of fame in heaven someday. This is talking about eternity with God or eternity away from God. Maybe you've been going through motions. Maybe you've just been acting. Maybe this has been a toe-stepping moment for you tonight, and it's something that the Word of God is speaking to you and convicting you to say a change needs to take place. And this is a great opportunity to do something about that, then to recognize that this reward here is not worth eternal separation from God. But the amazing thing is that God is willing to forgive you of that hurt, of that selfishness and pride, if you are willing to leave that behind and surrender that and crucify that in order to be a part of God's kingdom. Maybe it becomes being a child of God, putting our faith in Jesus and repenting of sin, having those sins washed away. Maybe that means coming back to God as we've started out with a heart that's living for Him and a heart that has gone back to serving self, recognizing now is the time to surrender to Him once again. If we can help you with that tonight to make sure that your life is right with the Lord, would you please come meet me at the front while we stand and while we sing.